Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we are stepping away from haunted buildings and talking about what is widely considered the most terrifying unspoken rule of the American wilderness. If you search through missing persons forums or deep woods hiking subreddits, you will always find stories about the deep forests of the Colorado Rockies. That's what's written all over the internet anyway. Whenever I'm scrolling through these threads late at night, the stories that chill me to the bone the most are always about the isolated snowy peaks of the San Juan Mountains. As a woman who loves investigating the paranormal and the unexplained, I realized I've actually never covered cryptid or wilderness lore on my channel before. So today, I want to start with a terrifying case. This story takes place in a completely off-the-grid ranger cabin. If you don't know what a deep woods Colorado cabin looks like, I'll put a picture on the screen. It's essentially a small, heavy timber structure surrounded by hundreds of miles of unbroken, towering pine trees. It's incredibly isolated. There is no cell service, no neighbors, and once the winter snow sets in, the roads are completely impassable. Today's story takes place right in the heart of that frozen isolation. Our story revolves around a man named David, and it will reveal exactly why the locals tell you to never, ever respond to voices in the woods. But before we dive into the chilling details, if you enjoy horror, mysteries, and deep woods legends, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. The story begins with David. He came from a very busy, crowded life in downtown Chicago, working as a freelance wildlife photographer. He was exhausted from the city and desperately needed a quiet place to focus on a new winter photography project. He rented a remote, privately owned cabin deep in the Colorado Mountains. The nearest town was a grueling 30 miles away, and he was warned by the owner to stock up on supplies because a massive winter storm was rolling in. When David arrived at the cabin that evening, he noticed something incredibly unsettling: the sheer, crushing silence of the forest. A city packed with millions of people is always loud, but out here, the woods were dead quiet. The cabin owner met him, handed over the heavy iron keys, and said, "Here's the place. Keep the fire going. And whatever you do, don't wander outside after dark. The local wildlife can be tricky." And with that, the owner got in his truck and quickly left. David settled in, but the environment was gnawing at him. You could see the unease on his face. He wasn't used to this level of total isolation. The next morning, he went out to take photos of the snow-covered pines, and though he finally felt a bit of peace in nature, the atmosphere shifted violently as soon as the sun began to set. The temperature plummeted, and a massive blizzard hit. David locked the heavy wooden door, threw the deadbolt, and built a massive fire, thankful to be inside. Later that night, around 2 a.m., David was sitting by the fire, reading a book while the wind howled outside. The isolation was absolute. Suddenly, through the howling wind, he heard a voice. It was coming from just outside his heavy front door. David froze, lowering his book. He strained his ears. Over the roaring blizzard, he heard a woman crying. David whispered to himself, "Who could possibly be out there? It's 20 below zero." He slowly walked toward the door. As he got closer, the voice spoke again, and a cold sweat broke out on David's forehead. "David, please, open the door. I'm so cold." David's heart stopped. It was the voice of his fiancée, Sarah. But that was impossible. Sarah was over 1,000 miles away, safe in their apartment in Chicago. She didn't even know exactly which cabin he had rented. "No, he whispered, stepping back. Something is really wrong here. The voice outside grew more desperate, perfectly mimicking Sarah's crying. David, please! The car broke down on the ridge. I'm freezing to death out here. Open the door. Panic seized David. His instincts screamed at him to throw the door open and save the woman he loved, but logic held him back. There was no car. No one could survive that hike in a blizzard. Gathering his courage, David crept toward the small frosted window next to the door, hoping to peek out and see if there was actually a person out there. He wiped a small circle of frost away from the glass. Standing right on the edge of the porch, illuminated by the faint moonlight, was a creature. It wasn't human. It was at least 7 feet tall, impossibly thin, with pale, hairless skin stretched tight over elongated bones. It was standing on 2 backward-bending legs, and its face was a blank, terrifying stretch of flesh with no eyes, just a jagged, gaping mouth. As David stared in absolute horror, the creature opened its jaw, and Sarah's voice came pouring out of its throat. "Why won't you let me in, honey?" David let out a choked gasp, stumbled backward, and scrambled into the center of the room. He grabbed his heavy hunting knife and pulled a blanket around his shoulders, shivering violently. Then, the dead silence of the cabin was broken by a new sound of scratches. Long, bone-like claws began dragging down the exterior of the wooden walls. The creature began pacing around the cabin, looking for a way in. It tapped on the windows, perfectly mimicking the voices of David's friends, his mother, and then, horrifyingly, mimicking David's own voice begging for help. For hours, the creature hissed and clawed at the walls. "If you live out here, you learn the rule." David remembered the owner's warning. "You never answer the voices." David sat in the center of the room, his mind pushed to the absolute breaking point. He squeezed his eyes shut and covered his ears, praying for daylight. 3 days later, after the blizzard finally broke, a local ranger drove up to check on the property. He found David curled in the corner of the cabin, violently shaking, clutching a knife, and refusing to look at the windows. The heavy wooden door on the outside was covered in deep, jagged gouge marks, and massive, unnatural footprints circled the cabin, eventually disappearing into the deep woods. It was tragically obvious to the ranger that David had barely survived a night with something ancient. As the ranger escorted the traumatized photographer to the truck, David kept muttering, "It had her voice. It had her voice." And that brings me to the end of today's video. It's hard to say exactly what was hunting David that night. In Appalachian and Rocky Mountain folklore, there are legends of flesh gates or mimics, ancient, starving entities that learn the voices of your loved ones to lure you away from the safety of the light. I know a lot of wilderness legends are just campfire stories, but the sheer number of hikers who report hearing their names called in the deep woods, it makes you wonder. The Colorado Rockies aren't the only places hiding terrifying secrets. There's actually a very similar, deeply unsettling story about an abandoned fire watch tower in Oregon. I'll link that video up in the cards right here, so be sure to check it out. Next, if you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button. It truly helps the channel out so much. And guys, please subscribe. As a female creator in the horror and mystery space, I love it so much when every single new member joins our little dark family here. Stay safe out there, never follow voices into the trees, and I will see you in the next one.